All right. Good evening. I'm Eileen Conroy, and I lead the marketing efforts for Reform Elections Now. Our organization was founded because we learned through surveys that Harvard Business School conducted that one of the drivers for reducing our competitiveness as a U.S. economy was partisan gridlock. So Reform Elections Now really has three focal points: conducting elections with full trust and participation, encourage genuine political competition, and the third, in which the topic today will be very relevant, is to remove obstacles to a functioning democracy. The obstacle is the role of big money and Citizens United. So I'm proud to introduce Peter Siris as our first speaker today. Peter is a co-founder, chairman of the board, and research director for our organization. He had an extensive career on Wall Street, in industry, and academia, a triple threat. He was a financial columnist for the New York Daily News, and Peter's educational background is a Bachelor of Arts with honors from Brandeis, MBA with distinction, which as a fellow HBS grad, I'm in awe of. And Peter was named 2019 Volunteer of the Year by the HBS Club of New York. So welcome, Peter.
Thanks. I apologize to everybody because our main speakers have not tuned in yet. So I'm going to have to wing it a little bit, but we'll get to them soon. And we're really lucky today to have an, um, a group of legislators from Hawaii, including one who's running for lieutenant governor. If you didn't, if you, she's waving at you, from Maryland, from New York, uh, and from Missouri, and uh, who have worked on this issue that we're going to talk about today. Um, so until our key speakers come, maybe can somebody make me co-host so I can share my
Oh,
screen.
here we go.
Thank you. Um, the so I didn't figure I was going to do this today, but um, just got to figure out where I saved everything. Um, Bear with me. Um,
I see it up in the top right-hand corner. There you go.
no, it's the wrong one. You saw it in the
Wrong
top
one.
right-hand corner, Mike?
It's not quite the top right-hand. There are a couple of them. They're all in the top right-hand quadrant
Okay, hold on one second.
towards the top. But okay, that's a good way to find it too. There you go.
Um, Hold on. Oh, okay, let's see if I can find it now on my desktop.
I thought you had it there.
I'm sure I do. Um, well, I could play solitaire. Um,
Do you want me to open what you sent? I think it was in the last 2 days at least.
yeah.
Okay, I can.
I apologize. Usually,
You want to, okay, I think this is it. Hold on a second. Are you're still taking a share?
okay, I'll hit stop share. Sorry. Oh,
Okay, I'm going to put this into, I think I've got you on, Peter, still.
okay, I stopped sharing.
Trying to get.
Okay, you got it. Um, so thanks. Sorry for this confusion. Um, let's go to slide 2, Mike. Um, so I don't know if any of you were like me, but the I sit and watch these political ads and think that they're all I see all day long is political ads in, running up in time for the election. And what's interesting is the amount of money that has gone into the election system compared to 2000. Money is tripled. Next slide. But the numbers are much higher because a lot of that money is dark money that doesn't show itself in normal elections. And if you look at the this slide here, what you'll see is that between 2004 and 2024, in 20 years, that outside spending on elections has gone up tenfold from 446 million to 4.46 billion. And a lot of that is we don't know where it's coming from. And some of the numbers are even higher because a lot of that is just dark money that we can never find trace. Next. Next slide.
I'm trying. There we go.
Okay. Now, what's interesting is that you have you missed a slide. There was one before this. Um, one next, there's one.
I
Okay.
don't have anything in between.
Okay. Okay. So what happened, Congress was working to put limits on the amount of money that could be spent in elections. But what happened was that in this period of time, the courts really just opened up the spending like crazy with a bunch of rulings, Buckley Vallejo, which struck down restrictions on political expenditures by individuals and corporations, Citizens United, and then Speech Now versus FEC. And these decisions really accounted for the tenfold increase in outside spending in election. Next. Next
Peter, are
slide.
you there?
Next slide. Sorry. Now, what's interesting about these rulings and about the expenditures is Americans are against them. And this slide is really interesting because if you look, 79% of all Americans disagree with Citizens United. But when you look at by party, 84% of Democrats, 79% of independents, and even 74% of Republicans. So this is something that's really bipartisan or multi-partisan. And, while the current Supreme Court may not do anything, there may be a way to overturn Citizens United. Next slide. And on the now we're gonna now Tom Moore, who we hope shows up soon because he was going to do this part. He has devised what we believe is a simple but really ingenious strategy. Instead of fighting to overturn Citizens United, he has something called the corporate power reset, which is a workaround. In each state, Tom is on. Carl says Tom's on. Tom, are you on?
I am on.
Okay, well, then we're going to turn it over to you and close up this PowerPoint presentation because this is your concept and you're the man with this.
Can you unmute?
He's unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, I think can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes. Mike, can you close up the PowerPoint and just let Tom talk and tell us what the corporate power reset is?
I can try to.
Just hit stop share.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate everybody's interest in this reform. And I'm super excited that you guys have some of the stars of this efforts on the call, Senator Rhodes.
I think you got a personal Zoom account. So if you could just rename yourself, it would probably.
No, that's okay. Let's let him talk and then we can.
That's on the three dots at the top right. You can rename.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so this is the corporate power reset, and it is a way of getting at Citizens United that hasn't been tried in 100 years. It's it's using incredibly old tools that have been sitting in state laws for more than a century, but they've been sitting getting dusty, and we kind of forgot that they were there. And ever since every state gave every corporation every power to do anything that they wanted to do about 100 years ago, we've just kind of sat right there. And what happened throughout the 1900s and the early 2000s is that the Supreme Court basically read these laws that were empowering these corporations and said, well, they can do anything that a person can do. So, well, people can spend in politics. And so, these corporations must be able to spend in politics also. And if they're able to spend in politics, if they've got the power to spend in politics, then they must have the right to spend in politics. You can't, and in all of these cases, including Citizens United, they said, look, you can't, if they're spending independently in politics, in elections, you can't ban them from doing that because there's no corruption interest and so forth. All these different legal rules that were getting thrown around and expanding what corporations could do in our politics. But all they were doing, every case that they ever saw was a regulation of some sort, where the government was saying, there's a set of powers, a set of things that governments do that say, like, that's regulatory. It's like, do this, or you can't do this, or you have to pay this, or fill out this form, or thing. These are all regulations. And it's most of what we see when we think about what governments do and the laws that they pass. But with corporations, not with people at all, but with corporations, there's another authority that state governments use, and it's creating them. It's not regulating them. It's actually creating them out of whole cloth. Before there's a corporate law provision in a state's laws, there are no corporations in that state. They don't exist outside the law. They don't exist in nature like people do. People existed before there were laws. People exist after there are laws. People exist during the laws, but corporations only exist during the law period. They don't exist outside that. And it makes a big difference. We've kind of thought of them as the same thing for the last 100 years because legally they've kind of resembled people, but they're not. And in every state's laws, there's three things that are incredibly important here. One is a provision that says, hey, corporations, we can change up your powers at any time, or get rid of you at any time, just so you know. And the Supreme Court has held consistently for about 200 years that means what it says, that states have an unlimited authority to do that. They can, whether it's a good reason, bad reason, no reason, doesn't matter who it hurts, doesn't matter what the effect is, they're in charge. They're in charge of what powers their corporations have, which makes sense. The states are the ones who are creating it. The second thing is that any change that you make affects everybody. It affects the existing corporations as well as any kind of new corporation. So, uh, so you set these rules once and it affects everybody, and that is incredibly helpful for this. And the third thing is that no out-of-state corporation can exercise any power in a state that the domestic corporations can't exercise. So if Hawaii changes its laws and says, hey, we're not going to extend, say, the power to spend in politics to our corporations anymore, the ones that we charter, it also means that every other corporation from all the other 49 states and anywhere else in the world are also lose the power to spend in politics. And so by dragging down the power list of your own corporations, you drag down the power list of everybody else. And that's what this move is. Instead of regulating and saying this is banned and this is forbidden and this is regulated and this is fines and all that stuff, instead of all this regulatory language and all these regulatory actions, this is just the state saying like, yeah, so that power list that we gave you, we're going to shorten that up a little bit, and you're not going to have the power to spend in politics anymore. And it kind of seems like rights and powers could be something that kind of interchange with each other, but they're not. And the way I like to think about it is like, do you have the power to fly? And I mean like flap your arms and fly. We do not. Our creators did not give us that power. Birds, bats, pterodactyls, they have the power to fly. We were not given that power by our creator. If the Supreme Court came to us tomorrow and said, hey, good news, you have a constitutional right to fly, none of us would go to the roof and give it a shot because, some piece of paper from a court, regardless of what it says, does not change the reality that we don't have the power to do it. And that's the same with corporations. What Hawaii has done with Act 11 is said like, hey, we are redefining you. We are your creator, and we are redefining you as something that doesn't have the power or the capacity to spend in politics anymore. And so if a court says like, well, they have a right to do it, it's like, yeah, that doesn't change the reality that they can't. And that's what makes this reform so powerful. It's not regulation, it's redefinition. And it is when you do that, when you disempower all the corporate forms in a state, you get rid of all corporate money and you get rid of all dark money because that comes through 501c4 dark money nonprofits and C6 business groups and LLCs and so forth. They're all out. And basically, at the end of the day, when this passes in a state, every dollar is from a human being, every dollar is disclosed, and every dollar is voluntary. And that is a huge, huge improvement over what we have right now. And that is the move. And very excitingly, this is the move that Hawaii has made. Senator Carl Rhodes, who's on the call here, was the sponsor of the bill. And they did a beautiful job of getting it through all the different committees, not having any terrible amendments attached to it. And Governor Josh Green signed it in May. It'll take effect next July 2027. But it is a super exciting reform, and it immediately picked up a federal court challenge, which is great. We were hoping for that. We're gonna beat them. The Hawaii Attorney General's office is getting their defenses together, and they're getting a lot of help. And that's the move. And instead of going at Citizens United directly or trying to overturn it or trying to violate it or anything like that, it just kind of goes around it and says like, oh yeah, all those corporations that have the power to spend in politics, okay, they have the right to do it. That's fine. We're just not going to create those kind of corporations anymore. We're going to create a different kind of corporation that doesn't have this political spending power. And that's a profoundly different kind of corporation to show up in court than the Citizens United nonprofit that did in that case.
And
And that's the
Tom,
move. That's the whole thing.
sorry for interrupting. I just want to say one of the things that fascinated me with your presentation is how often you quoted decisions from people like Scalia, Alito,
Yeah,
and Clarence Thomas, like Hobby Lobby. That what the conservatives judges have been saying for years is, hey, this is a state's issue.
exactly.
So
Yeah, it is. This
how
can only be done with state law. There is no federal law
yeah,
that touches any of this.
it's fascinating. Should um do why don't before we go to Hawaii, let's see if we have any questions for Tom just on the basics of how this concept works.
Hey, Tom, it's Tim Gordon. It's really, sounds very interesting. The one concern I have is if only Democratic states do this, what?
Well, the next state up on the agenda, and so far I haven't seen him on.
Nope.
He's supposed to be on the call is Montana, and in
Yeah.
Montana, which is hardly a Democratic
I
state.
get it, but I just say that if they're, if Texas doesn't, I mean,
Right.
if Republican states don't do this, as Democrats shooting themselves in the foot a little bit, how's that going to work?
No, and that's a great question, and thank you for it. So not really. And what's interesting about this is this is not exactly one of these things like if you're doing a constitutional amendment, you got to pass it, and in all these states and three-quarters of the states, and then nothing happens until you pass it all. Or with other reforms, it's like you're tying one hand behind your back, and it's kind of a prisoner's dilemma kind of thing going on. This is not like that. If Hawaii passes this, they get dark and corporate money out of their politics top to bottom. And when Montana passes this, as the Montana plan is on the ballot, is headed for the ballot this fall and will probably pass, they will get dark and corporate money out of their politics top to bottom. They don't care if Wyoming never does it. They don't care if Ohio never does it. Their own elections, just within the boundaries of Hawaii and within the boundaries of Montana, their elections are fixed in terms of dark and corporate money. So it's actually one of these things like if Hawaii and Montana end up being the only two states that ever pass this, I don't think it's going to be the case. But if that is the case, they'll have massively improved their politics. And it's a shame that everybody else didn't get the benefit of that, but it doesn't really affect how well it works in those states. The other thing is that this is not something that polls higher among Democrats, certainly around 80%, but it also polls around 65% support for these kinds of things with Republicans. Nobody likes Citizens United. Nobody likes dark money. Nobody likes the system that we've got right now. And people are hungry for a solution. This works.
Tom, there are two questions. They're a little bit related. One is whether other states are in line. I know that I've heard the number 14, that it may be even higher. But the other question is, can it be easily applied to states that already have been chartered? Can you change the charter basically?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This can be done just as Hawaii did it in every state in the union. You can, if you want, put it into your state constitution. You can do it through a ballot initiative, either into statute or into your constitution. But every state can do this. We did have bills going in 14 states, 14 other states other than Hawaii this year. And since Hawaii had this spectacular success in passing it, we've had 8 more states reach out to us at the Center for American Progress asking about how they can do it in their states next year. I expect to have about 30 states next year who are going to be.
Can I interrupt? Sorry, can I interrupt to ask a favor? I just saw on the text that the next lieutenant governor of the state of Hawaii has to make an airplane. So why don't we let Della and Carl talk about what they did in Hawaii, and then we'll come back to you.
That is perfect. It's actually much more interesting than my story. I actually have to run. My wife is hosting an event at our house,
Okay.
which I have to help with.
Okay.
Thank you so much, though. You're about to hear a great story, and these people are heroes. So thanks for looking at this. Della, have a great flight, and Carl, I'll talk to you later.
Thanks very much, Tom.
Okay.
All
So
right.
now we're going to turn to our team from Hawaii. And the answer, just before we turn to the team from Hawaii, the answer to several questions are that when the state, well, let's go to Hawaii. They'll answer the question, and then I'll stick my nose in. Carl, since you were the Della, do you have enough time to let Carl talk for a few minutes, or do you want to talk first?
Ask Della first. I don't know.
Okay.
She may already be gone. I'm not sure, but
Della,
let's see.
you still here?
I am still here, and let me
Go
just
ahead.
first say, let me first to say, it was really Senator Carl Rhodes who was a champion of this, and so you really need inside champions, legislators who are going to move this bill. I was a counterpart to Senator Carl Rhodes as a member of the Judiciary Committee, but it was really important that we had not just legislators and lawmakers who were supported in both chambers, and this is going to be different in each state with different legislative arrangements. But in our case, we needed to have supporters on both sides. And what was critically important was having bipartisan support. So on my side in the House, we have a good government caucus that meets, it's a group of legislators, bipartisan in both House and Senate, as well as community stakeholders like Common Cause, League of Women Voters, groups that are dedicated to good government reforms. We had them championing the bill externally. And so it's really important that there be civic engagement around this. When it was thought that the bill would die in the House, we were able to get it shaken loose in the Judiciary Committee, which was the last stop in the House. And because of that, we then got into a situation where we could go into conference. And so I really credit people like Senator Carl Rhodes, my other colleagues who pushed this, as well as community groups. The civic engagement piece is huge because, as Tom said, Republicans and Democrats alike hate Citizens United and hate the influence of corporate monies. I'm going to turn it over to Carl because he will be able to fill in with all the rest. I will stay on as long as I can, but I really cannot emphasize enough that it's outside groups that are going to help make this happen in every state. When we look at Montana and we look at the number of people who have signed a citizens petition to get it onto the ballot, that's how it's going to work in other states. So I'll turn it over to you, Carl.
Well, before we turn it over to Carl, I would like to ask you one thing. You said earlier you were going to run for Congress, but then you decided to run for lieutenant governor because, and I'd like you, for those who missed it, I thought that was a very compelling comment on your part.
So there was a couple of things. Our attorney general was not very supportive of the bill because, believing in the traditional kind of analysis, we don't have people who are necessarily supported. And you're going to see that in red or in blue states, that this is a new way of looking at things. So I wanted to come back and run for lieutenant governor to help defend the bill when there are detractors. I'm also running in a campaign where I'm running against someone who is supported by essentially $10 million of dark money in a super PAC. So this is a fight that has to happen in all states. One of the important things I think is that states are the laboratories of democracy. So this case will likely get to the Supreme Court. I don't doubt that. But as more and more states adopt this approach, the United States Supreme Court is going to have to, one, go back to its case law and then look at what it is that the states and people are concerned about. And so I think when you have that kind of movement, it's also going to pressure things to happen at the federal government. And look, we don't know what's going to happen in five years when this litigation finally gets up to the highest levels. But hopefully there's enough tools in the toolkit to begin to contain the influence of corporate monies. And that's why I think it was really important that Hawaii be the first state to pass this law.
Thanks. Now we'll turn it over to Carl. The bill's sponsor in Hawaii.
Yeah, well, so Thank you. I don't, what would you like to,
Why don't you just tell us what you did and how you did it?
Okay. So well, for me, it was the genesis was actually quite mundane. I was reading a Robert Reich social media post, and I was like, I mean, I've been interested in this topic for quite a while. And as soon as I saw that idea, I was like, shoot, I should have thought of that 5 years ago. Because, a corporation really is, I'm a lawyer, and if you look at a corporation, it's just a little stack of papers. And if you ask that stack of papers questions, it won't answer. It can't go to court by itself. It's completely a creation of the state. And so when I saw that, I was like, okay, well, I'm putting that in as a bill. Other people saw it too. Other bills went in. Senator Jared Kilgore put one in. I think maybe Dello put one in too. There's somebody in the House put one in. I think maybe my draft was a little farther, a little more scrubbed. And anyway, that was the vehicle that the legislative vehicle that ended up getting used. I have to admit, I was surprised at the final vote. There's 76 legislators in Hawaii. There's 25 in the Senate, 51 in the House. And the final vote was, there was only one no. There was one person that was missing in the Senate. I forget who that was, but it was 74 to 1. And we don't have a lot of Republicans in Hawaii, but basically all but one of them voted for it as well. And, there were points where people were telling me that well, some of the unions had concerns. Some of the unions still have concerns, but they're not exempt. I'm sorry, I'm just now reading the question over here. They're not exempt from the final bill. Yeah, the feeling was from Tom and from others that if you started pulling out organizations from the scope of the legislation that were traditionally associated with a particular point of view, then it would make it easier for the court to say, you're being viewpoint specific. We're not trying to be viewpoint specific. This is corporate. This is form specific, meaning that actual people are the ones who need to spend the money, not corporations. So there was some sense going along that this was a bill that had a lot of momentum behind it. I never really felt that as the sponsor because the bill almost died a couple of times. Della's mentioned one already. The real close call was this is getting into the weeds, so I'll do a little explaining because even politically active people don't always know these kind of details. But the Senate version was a little bit different from the House version, which means you have to have a conference committee and you have to work out the differences because you can only send one version of the bill to the governor, right? Because you send more than one, what does that even mean? So there was one chair in the House who had concerns about the bill, and it took a long time to work them out. And we have a deadline. We can't go past 6 o'clock on I forget what night it was. Anyway, we have to vote by 6 o'clock. We literally did not start voting in conference on the bill until 5:59 and 15 seconds. And we made it and it passed, and the other interesting thing was that because it was right at the end, there were conferees that weren't there, and there's a quorum for these things. And the guy who made the quorum for us was a Republican who typically is quite MAGA, but on this specific issue, he agrees with me. Him and I agree, which is unusual. We don't usually. And he was there and he voted yes, and he made the quorum. So it was. And I still wasn't sure it was going to pass at that point because I never had this sort of sense that there was this freight train behind it that some other people had. Anyway, we were still working out the details, and so on the third to the last day of session, we did what they call a floor amendment that changed it again. And you have to pass it in both the House. You have to pass exactly the same one in the House and the Senate. Otherwise, you're back to having two separate bills and it's dead. We passed the same exact amendments, which meant though that you have to hold it over for 48 hours, which meant the thing went down to the very last day of our regular session. And I still wasn't sure it was going to pass. It's just one of these things that's sort of like the Cubs winning the 2016 World Series. It wasn't until like the eighth inning of the seventh game that you're like, oh, okay, they're going to win. And then of course the vote was 74 to 1. And then I was like, oh, well, this was going to pass the whole time. I just didn't know it. So that's the story. And then Josh Green, the governor, I mean, we were quite confident he would pass it partly just because it's so popular. But he signed it very quickly. He didn't wait around to keep everybody in suspense. So I'm looking over at the questions.
Does it, I think one question that was posed is, does the law apply to unions or just corporations?
It applies to the corporate form. So if you look at the bill, it's this laundry list of the artificial entities that states create, and unions are included.
And so PACs?
No, it doesn't cover it doesn't say it doesn't touch election law at all. So all those PACs and super PACs and all that stuff, those are in on the election law chapters, but we don't touch that. I mean, there's some mention of it in the preamble, but that's it. Mostly it's just boring old corporate law. What will be the effect on national versus state elections? There's no a Hawaii corporation or a corporation that's doing business in Hawaii, which is a point that Tom Moore stressed. It doesn't matter. We don't give powers. All states are like this. If you're incorporated in Delaware, which is a lot of corporations are, and you come to Hawaii even before this bill passed, you did not have any more powers than Hawaii corporations did. We thought that all states feel that that's unfair that an out-of-state corporation would have more powers than their own corporations have. So same with this. If it's an out-of-state corporation, they can't spend the money either. And so it will affect both federal elections in Hawaii and state elections because, of course, the states run the federal elections. The federal candidates are on a state ballot.
Here's a question that also relates to how it affects PACs, if at all. Super PACs.
So it affects PACs. It doesn't change the law about PACs, but I'm looking at this question about if PACs are not mentioned, how is dark money limited? The problem with the funneling of campaign money through corporations is that you can give them some generic name, Citizens for Good Government or whatever. You can spend the money and then dissolve the corporation 20 minutes later, and it's very difficult to figure out who the actual person was who spent the money. Well, in this case, because the corporations won't be able to spend the money, you will have a real person to point to immediately. So the anonymous money will disappear. You'll have a name, a human name attached to it, not Citizens for Good Government. So PACs, super PACs. Regular PACs can still operate in Hawaii. The super PACs, if the super PACs are funded by individuals that are named, then there's no effect. Can it be a fake name? Well, a PAC has to organize as well. Oh, you mean for the person? No, there's already laws. The campaign laws in Hawaii are that you have to. It's a criminal penalty for making a donation to a PAC in somebody else's name. You have to use your own money, and I'm pretty sure that's true everywhere. But you have to spend your own money to make a donation to a PAC or to a candidate committee.
Why don't I was going to say let's come back to Carl, but
let me take a crack at John Sumberg's question if you don't mind.
Because he's a real lawyer from Yale Law School, so you don't screw with John Sumberg.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's the $64,000 question. So what if you look at the line of cases having to do with the corporate powers and the state control of those corporate powers, it's pretty clear, as Tom Moore pointed out already, that for I think there's a Marshall decision that talks about how the states have complete control over of what corporations can do. And of course, in the old days, they had much more specific corporate charters. You can grow corn and make whiskey, and that's it. You can't do anything else. But as time went on, they evolved into just being anything a human can do, you can do. and that's how we ended up where we are. So the question is, at least in my mind, is, are we talking about a right or a power? I suppose, well, what I suspect that the real attack will be if, I'm not sure exactly. I think there have to be some pretty good legal gymnastics to get to this point, but the question will be, will the federal courts will they say to us states that are trying this, you're calling that a power, but really that's a right, and therefore you can't do that. But then that would essentially mean that the federal government is inserting itself into the state's long established right to determine what their corporations can do. And of course, we already do this in the tax code. If you're a 501c3, you're completely prohibited from engaging in electoral politics. You still can lobby to a certain extent, but we make the government, the concept of making someone organizing an entity like that, making a trade between tax benefits and giving up some of their First Amendment powers is not new by any stretch. But I think that's the key question. When you have a Supreme Court that gets the answer they want, no matter what the precedent says, I don't know. Maybe they go that route, but I do think they're going to have to do some serious legal gymnastics to get there.
I just we were going to go to Montana, but why don't we just quickly go to New York and Maryland and Missouri? So
Start with Kristen then, and
yes,
Queens.
and so some of these states are proposing laws. Some of them, the laws have succeeding, some are not. So let's hear from our state senator from Queens, Manhattan, and Brooklyn.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I think this conversation has been really fascinating. I just want to say it's been lovely to share the space with colleagues from Hawaii and certainly other states as well. I'll be visiting very soon, so maybe we'll have another chance to connect. But it's always important for state legislators to have these spaces because ultimately so much of this should be done at the federal level, but with a gridlocked Congress, with an increasingly hostile federal administration to our elections processes, I think it's really clear that states have to be the ones to step up. And so in the spirit of stepping up, I've been really privileged to chair the elections committee now for 2 years, and we've been trying to mirror some of the approaches nationally. I know we're certainly mirroring Montana's approach. And a bill that I introduced on artificial personhood, really does get to the heart of some of the issues we've talked about today, meaning that, as a trigger law, we would want to see New York remove any power. And I know we're talking about the idea of power versus rights for artificial persons, and any power for an artificial person to have participation in our political process. And so, yeah, it's been well received here in New York, and we've certainly gotten several co-sponsors in our legislature, and we want to continue building on this. Another way, though, I'd add is not only in introducing bills around artificial personhood, but that we're looking to check corporate influence in our elections and corporate spending is through a robust public campaign financing system. This is the second cycle we'll have a state level public campaign finance system, and in its inception, obviously we did it to maximize the power of small dollar donations, but we saw about 50,000 New Yorkers plus participate and donate, and that is double what we saw in previous election cycles. We had almost 200 campaigns statewide participate in public campaign finance, and I think it shows that when you provide the conditions for smaller dollars and grassroots dollars to be amplified, and for candidates to really shift their focus away from corporate spending to constituents that are able to help fund their campaigns, you see that both constituents and everyday people want to give and campaigns want to participate. So we're, looking at long-term solutions with hopefully the overturning of Citizens United and trigger laws that make a lot of sense. We've seen that be successful in, for example, the conversation around abortion access. And we are also looking at short-term solutions where we want to counter the outsized influence that corporations have. As an elected official and as a candidate myself, I've never taken a dollar from corporations. I don't take money from LLCs, period. I also don't take money from lobbying firms. So I think, there's a responsibility to model that behavior myself as we take on these fights. So I know we've had a lot happening today, but just wanted to offer some of those thoughts to the broader conversation and happy to answer questions.
Why don't we just get the rest of the states in? Sheila, you want to talk about what's happening in Maryland?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth. I represent a part of Baltimore County in the Maryland House of Delegates. And I was an advocate for campaign finance reform long before I was an elected official. So when I read Tom Moore's article last year, it was like a bolt of lightning. I had previously been working on the amendment route, and just reading that article, I felt like, why did nobody ever find this before? It was just amazing, amazing to read this approach. And so I was involved in a number of conversations last year with a couple of other legislators and some activists. And we agreed that one of the other delegates, Delegate Jen Terrassa, would sponsor it the last session, which she did. And we always kind of thought that this would probably be an education year, that it was, a new idea, that it was going to take some time for people to get adjusted to it. And we didn't have high expectations that it would pass this year. I am amazed at Hawaii that you were able to get this done so quickly. Bravo to you. And you're really my heroes. And so I'm excited to see what Montana does. Delegate Terrassa, and I will mention one funny thing about the not funny thing about the bill is last session is that the State Department of Assessment and Taxation gave us what's called death by fiscal note, because they said they were going to need all this staff to enforce, and make sure corporations were not spending. And so that's certainly something that we have to address. There is a robust campaign finance disclosure system in Maryland, so I'm not sure why they need, all the staff for enforcement, but, certainly we're going to be discussing that. Delegate Terrassa is not running for re-election. She's running for clerk of the court. So I'm going to be picking it up for the next session and really looking forward to sponsoring it. And we'll be having some conversations about finding a Senate sponsor as well. So I think that's about it. And thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this discussion.
Great. Great. Wick, I know you haven't been as successful in Missouri. You want to talk about what you've been through there?
Yeah, so Missouri is a hard sell right now, unfortunately, because we do have a Republican-controlled legislature, a supermajority in the legislature, as well as every statewide office. And so even though I know privately that we have a lot of supporters on both sides of the aisles for something like this, uh, publicly they're not as willing right now until I think we switch that up some because they're the ones, the benefiting the most right now from the reform not being there. Um, that said, this year I was speaking at the LGBT Victory Institute and in DC, and while there went out of my way to meet with Tom and talk about this and see how if we could implement it here. And so we crafted the legislation for Missouri, being fully aware that it likely would not go anywhere this year. And that I like calling it an education year because I've been probably spoken about it more cynically, and I'm gonna take that. So thank you for that. But I do think that there is a hunger for it right now, especially because Missouri has cleared the way for data center development, and that has also seen a lot of bipartisan, response. And I think that these things all wrap in together, and there will be a lot of appetite for this. That said, I am, I was in year two of my first term as a legislator in the super minority. So my goal for next year is to identify some people across the aisle who would be willing to champion this and put their name on it because it has a lot more chance of going anywhere. I don't think we've passed a Democratic bill in 6 years, like a standalone bill in Missouri. So we've got to find that champion on the other side of the aisle here.
I wonder if it's worthwhile to consider having some of the other party speakers from the states where there has been support that's bipartisan, uh, having a chance to share their views across states.
Yeah,
What do you
absolutely. I'm
think
here to
of,
learn more than to speak, honestly, because I want to see how this has gone through in other states, and because
Well,
it needs to happen here badly,
yep.
everywhere, but here as
so maybe
well.
we can send Carl to Missouri at some point.
What's interesting is that all states are different and have different experiences. The state that should approve this next is Montana. And Jeff was supposed to be on, but something must have happened. But what's interesting about Montana is that for decades, Montana was controlled by the Anaconda Copper Company. And Montana had, they owned 9 of the 13 newspapers and things like that. And this year, or last year, Montana had a Senate race, and the expenditures in the Senate race were $457 per voter. It was the most expensive per capita Senate race in American history. And that is one reason why a state like Montana, which is red, the Republicans are much more supportive of this because of their experience with big money. So, in each state, it's going to be somewhat different.
Okay, I think we hit the official endpoint in terms of the 1 hour slot. So certainly if some people need to leave, they should feel free to.
Well,
Are there other questions that we can see raised? I don't know if Eileen or Eleanor have been tracking to make sure we covered the main questions that came through. Anyone that feels they've got a question that hasn't been addressed, please feel free to unmute and ask the question.
And I apologize for not sort of listening.
Can you identify yourself, and I can try to spotlight you as well.
This is Eleanor Latimer. You can't hear me.
Let's see.
It's so frustrating.
If you want, Eleanor, it looks like your bandwidth is low. A question from Pamela
Yes.
Stein was, can this be applied to existing corporations as well as newly created ones?
Oh yeah, this is Carl Rhodes again from Hawaii. Yeah. The answer is yes. That's what the reset. I think legally, what will happen is that the power will just go away on the date of the act's effectiveness. But I think originally Tom thought about it in terms of like stripping all powers away from a corporation and then giving them back. So that's where the term reset came from. But yes, it applies to currently existing corporations.
Then we have a question from Linda Brewster. Someone said that labor unions are exempted from the final bill. Is that correct?
Not from Act 11, no. It's all about the corporate form. So it all depends on how exactly you're organized. But Act 11 is basically a big long list of all the artificial entities in Hawaii statute, and says you can't spend money on political camp or on politics anymore.
And
I mean, I guess a longer answer for that is for most unions, what this will mean is they'll go back to pre-Citizens United, where they had to uh, solicit their membership and have the money sent, either have them donate directly, or um, it'll go into a regular PAC, and the regular PACs are not affected, but it will just be a return to pre-2010. Now, for corporations that have super PACs, then that will have more of an effect on them, because they won't be able to spend general fund money, and they'll still be able to spend membership money, but it'll change the dynamic.
okay. Then a question is, from Harvey Susswine, what will be the effect on national versus state elections?
Well, since I'm sorry, if there's other people who want to answer this question, I'm sorry, I'm hogging it. But for Act 11, it doesn't make any difference. The state, of course, runs the so-called federal elections. There are federal candidates on our ballots, and so because the entity that we're talking about is a state entity, they will not be allowed to spend money on politics, period, whether it's a federal election or a state election or a local election.
And from Mark Shapee, if PACs are not mentioned, how is dark money eliminated?
Well, the advantage is that right now the individuals can basically launder their money through corporations and make it very difficult to figure out who the actual people were that gave it. With Act 11, because corporations are not allowed to spend money on politics, the individuals still can under Citizens United, but they'll have to identify themselves, and that's where the greater transparency would come in.
And that's a critical issue. I just want to interrupt and say that's a critical issue. There are two real issues here. Can you stop people from spending? And can you identify who is spending? For example, there's an election now going on in Wisconsin, and there is a Democratic socialist running for governor of Wisconsin, and a large percentage of her money is coming from the Republicans because they think she'll be easier to beat in November. So it's identifying as well as stopping.
Then a question from John Sumberg. Thank you. I'm interested in how this stands up. Sorry, I just moved too quickly about the First Amendment. I'm interested in how this stands up to a First Amendment attack. Are there federal constitutional limits to what a state can require in forming corporations within that state?
And
okay,
we talked about this a little bit before, but I think the sort of superficial answer is no. In fact, the feds have given the state. There are some nationally chartered banks, I believe, and I also believe, I'm not absolutely positive about this, but my understanding is that those nationally chartered banks do not have the authority to spend money in politics.
They do not. That is a federal law, and the national chartered banks are banned from.
Right. So I think I don't put it this way, is if I were still an associate practicing law, I have not been able to come up with a case that is not easily distinguishable from the situation that we're putting the federal courts in now by taking away the power of the of corporate entities to spend money on politics. So at the very worst, it's a novel question. We certainly didn't do all this to lose, but of course it's possible that we could, but I'm not sure what the theory would be right now.
This may have already been answered. Judy Chambliss asked, can you explain more about the effect on unions? Judy, has your question been answered?
I think it's been answered already. Fine.
Okay. From Tim Gordon, 6 Republican billionaires gave approximately 1 billion in 2024. This can still happen.
Yes, because this bill doesn't overturn Citizens United. So an individual that has the rights of a human can spend, according to Citizens United, they can, if it's not coordinated with the candidate committee, and even that's been eroded just in the last couple of weeks, they can spend as much money as they want. The advantage would be that they can't launder it through a corporation, so you could actually see who spends it. But that's because sometimes these super PACs take extremely unpopular positions, and one of the reasons that the donors don't want their name to be associated with it is because what they're proposing is just crazy, and or they go really negative, and people don't like that either. And so it will make a difference in terms of how much money gets spent, because people who have been able to donate anonymously won't be able to anymore.
Thank you. Louisa Miller, is there anything that can be done before the midterms?
Well, not in Hawaii. Our bill doesn't go into effect until next year. So I don't know. Other places, if you can get it done quick, well, great. But for us, it's next year.
This is a process that will take a while. But one of the things that's interesting that I said when in reading Tom's stuff is a lot of if you look, for example, at the Citizens United decision, there is, and there will be a PowerPoint presentation posted on our website, which everybody can take a look at, that covers all these things. But one of the things is that Justice Scalia basically said, hey, all the power is up to the states. So, Della, did you want to say something? I know you said Carl was handling everything perfectly, but
I think she was just dropping off.
okay.
Catch her flight to Maui.
Okay. But, and look, we don't say that this is definitely going to be upheld, but we think this is a really interesting grassroots example of the kind of things that can be done.
Well, if I've missed a question, I think I've covered everything in the chat.
And if anybody in Long Island, in Queens or Brooklyn or the Upper East Side wants to stop by the Senator Gonzalez's office, she'll be happy to see her constituents, right?
Yes, please stop by. We're on 42nd and 2nd. And even if you're not in district, feel free to reach out. I'm going to drop my email in the chat just in case folks want to ask questions or follow the work we're doing.
Well, terrific. I want to thank all who joined, as well as our state representatives, as well as Peter Siris, who was very instrumental in first researching this topic and engaging with the different local state initiatives. We'll be sending out the recording to all who registered. And thank you so much for your support of the goals of reform elections now.
Thanks so much.
Eileen, you're going to take care of, you have the recording up on
Yes.
In the cloud.
Yes, I got that.
I think, I don't know if Harry got the charts loaded on